5 Spanish warships converged on the Blasket Islands. And today, the wreckage and the romance still draw divers. Don Tucker is a veteran underwater explorer, lured back here again and again.
Kids, as you know, probably want to be train drivers, things like that. But I always had an interest in diving, but in those days it was the standard diving vest, which is a copper helmet and things. And then I found out there was a local club who did scuba diving in St Helens in Lancashire, and I joined them. When Donald Campbell's Bluebird went down in Lake Coniston, we were the only amateur club around to help the Navy at that time. The theory is that when he changed the engine just before New Year's Day, he had the engine changed, which the entrance is just above the cockpit, and they normally have a mesh gauge around that. But they hadn't put it on because it was in a bit of a hurry, and when she somersaulted, his straps broke, and the theory is that it was actually sucked into the jet engine, and that's why Bluebird was never recovered, because Lady Campbell, his mother, said leave it down there.
The Campbell tragedy only whetted Tucker's appetite for more underwater adventures, and raised during an era when the movies of the day did a big line in swashbuckling, the lure of the Armada would prove irresistible.
We came over here in 1963 in the first instance because we understood that a Spanish galleon had sank very, very quickly, and therefore this should be some form of time capsule. And then in 1967 we were diving down this end, north end of the Sound, near just off Beginnish, and 2 of my divers actually saw 3 large guns lying on the bottom. One of the men was an engineer, so he was able to get hold of this last gun, bearing in mind there is a 3 or 4 knot current. Couldn't hold it on very, very long, but with being an engineer, he was able to differentiate between a piece of iron pipe or a bell-mouth bronze cannon, and he swore till he died that he'd actually had hold of a bronze cannon.
That any Spaniard survived the ordeal was due to Admiral Juan Martinez de Recalde, who had landed the Spanish flotilla at Smerick, just 6 miles away, in 1580. This superb sailor knew these waters well.
We were very fortunate, and there was a detailed diary made by a guy called Marcus Ramburu, who was the Paymaster General of the Squadron of Castile, and he described sailing down the west coast of Ireland being battered by this terrible westerly wind. And he approached here. The angle he was approaching, he thought that this was a bay, couldn't see the exit between the 2 islands, and he pulled away again. But then he found Recalde, who was the Lord High Admiral of the Armada, who told him to follow him, and he was terrified to see him bringing him through a gap no wider than the length of his own boat, which was about 100 feet. And that gap lies between the main island and Beginnish, and it's the only safe passage through there, because if you look further down you can see reefs just below the water surface, and anything coming through there would have sunk. On the 21st, the Santa Maria came through and actually hit a rock coming in there. She stayed there for 2 hours, and then the tide changed and she sank in an instant, not a soul being saved. A most terrifying sight. But when you check the English state papers of the period, you find out that there was actually one survivor, a Giovanni de Monona, who was the son of the pilot. He was found on the shore, taken to Dingle for interrogation, and he described in great detail who was on the ship.
Aramburu's chronicle also records Recalde's decision to scuttle another badly damaged ship. He would make it back to Spain, so would Recalde, the high-born Basque.
Later in the day, on the 21st, another ship came in. This was San Juan de Hora, H-O-R-R-A, and he was in desperate trouble. And so Recalde decided he would take off all the men, distribute it amongst the other ships there, and he would also take off the guns. It was then burnt to the waterline, so presumably it just went with the tide out there. And it may well be that the wreck that was found is actually the San Juan de France of Hora. But I am 100% convinced that the guns, everything, are at the north end of Beginnish in this water here.